Yeah, it's recording now. We can start.
All right, Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa dhurriyyatihi wa azwajihi ajma'in. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى اله وصحبه اجمعين. اللهم ربنا زدنا علما يا ارحم الراحمين. نعوذ بالله من علم لا ينفع وقلب لا يخشع ونفس لا تشبع ودعوة لا يستجاب لها. So اللهم ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي امري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. So once again, the Prophet ﷺ walks in and discovers the Sahaba sitting together. He asks them what they're doing. They say, we're discussing the signs of the hour. So he says, then count 10 signs. And he gives us the 10 signs in no particular order. Dajjal, Ya'juj wa Ma'juj, Dukhan, Dabatul Ard, the sun rising from the west, the three sinkings of the earth, one in the east, one in the west, and one in Arabia, a fire that will come out of Yemen and drive the people to their place of assembly for judgment, and the son of Mary will descend. So tonight, so far we've covered Dajjal, we've covered Ya'juj wa Ma'juj, we've covered Dabatul Ard, and we've covered the sun rising from the west. Tonight, inshallah, well, tonight for me, it's daytime for you guys. We're going to cover Dukhan, and we're going to cover the three sinkings of the earth, inshallah. So, Dukhan is found in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم فارتقب يوم تأتي السماء بدخان مبين يغشى الناس هذا عذاب أليم ربنا اكشف عنا العذاب إنا مؤمنون. So, wait then, O Prophet, for the day when the sky will be veiled with a haze. So this is Dukhan. Dukhan is smoke. It'll be clearly visible. It's Dukhanim Mubin. It's like when you say the Quran is Kitabun Mubin. It's a very easily understandable, clear book. Well, here we have the same word being used for the smoke. It'll be very easy to see. Overwhelming the people. Yaghshan Nas. We all know this from Surah Al-Ghashiyah, the overwhelming event. Right? Allah uses the same word for Ghashiyah for the day of judgment. It overwhelms everyone. So Yaghshan Nas, this will overwhelm all the people. And they will cry out, this is a painful torment. So this isn't just any kind of smoke. This is something that's going to cause lots of pain and suffering for people. And they're going to be amongst them believers who will say, رَبَّنَا اكْشِفْ عَنَّا الْعَذَابِ. Oh Allah, remove this torment from us. Inna mu'minun. Indeed, we are believers. I would memorize this dua if I were you. Very important. Now, we cannot understand Dukhan until we understand a very important subject. And that is, we need to understand the Malhama. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala informed the Prophet to tell us, Umranu Bayt al-Maqdis. Whenever you see Jerusalem, which is Bayt al-Maqdis, being built up like beautifully, Kharabu Yathrib, then at that time you're going to see Medina being in a state of kharab, like destruction, forlorn desolation. So whenever you see Kharabu Yathrib, you're going to see Khurujul Malhama. The great war will take place. Malhama from laham, meat. That's why it's called the great slaughter. Okay. But Khurujul Malhama, when you see the Malhama, Fathul Qastantiniya. You will see the opening of Constantinople. Wait a second. I thought Mehmed II conquered Constantinople like 500 years ago. Wait a second. Did the Malhama happen before that? What is this Malhama? And then after that, when you see Fathul Qastantiniya, Khurujud Dajjal. And according to Abu Dawood, he says this will happen in the span of 7 months or 7 years. So from the time the Muslims conquer Constantinople, either 7 months later or 7 years later, Dajjal will appear in human form, his khuruj. Okay? But wait, Mehmed the Conqueror, didn't he conquer Constantinople like 500 years ago? And we still haven't seen Dajjal. I guess he wasn't the one who conquered Constantinople after all. Wallahu alam. Okay, so now that we have opened up a new subject, we want to understand Dukhan, we want to understand the Malhama, we're going to go to Surah Ar-Rahman. And we want to understand the subject of the Malhama and the Dukhan. Okay? So Surah Ar-Rahman is a very interesting surah. It's this surah that, number one, keeps talking to two different groups of people, and also keeps knocking us in the head, asking us a question about them, which is, and we all know this ayah because we've heard it 1,000 times, فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ, which means, wait, I passed the ayah, I'm sorry. Yeah, there it is. So which, or with which of the ala, blessings and favors of your Lord, tukadhiban, will you two groups of people deny? In essence, this surah is reminding you about the world Allah created, and then there's going to be some sort of other world that people prefer over Allah's world. And there are going to be two groups of people. Okay? Let's see if we can find out who these two groups of people are. So Allah keeps telling us more and more and more. And then eventually he's going to tell us who these people are. Let me find the ayah. Sorry, this is the one part I didn't have queued up already. Oh, so Allah says, Ya ma'shar al-jinni wal-ins. This is the ayah. So it begins with, سَنَفْرُغُ لَكُمْ أَيُّهَا الثَّقْلَانِ. So Allah says he's going to deal with you two groups of people, and he calls them thaqlan, from thaqil in Arabic, which means something heavy. I have a question for you, Mr. Zargo. Do jinn weigh anything? Do they have weight to them?
I don't think so, since they're created from fire.
Exactly.
Yep.
And do humans have weight?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely. We are a mass. We can be weighed. So who are these two beings? Allah's going to tell you, Ya ma'shar al-jinni wal-ins. So he's talking to a group of jinn and ins who deny Allah's favors. So they are sinful, evil, and they work together. And yet one has weight and the other one doesn't. So what is Allah talking about here? Literal weight? Or are they heavy with something else? Heavy with sin? Yeah, they're called thaqlan because they're weighted down with all of the sins they're doing together with each other. So we're talking about a group of jinn who are evil and a group of ins or insan who are evil, humans who are in alignment with each other. And then Allah is going to tell you something about their alignment and what they're going to attempt to do together. And istata'tum, أن تنفذوا من أقطار السماوات والأرض. That if you can penetrate beyond the realm of the heavens and the earth, فانفذوا, then go ahead and do it. لا تنفذون إلا بسلطان. You won't be able to do it unless Allah decrees it to happen, basically. And then Allah tells you how he's going to deal with these groups of evil jinn and evil humans who work together to penetrate the heavens and the earth. He says, يُرْسِلُ عَلَيْكُمَا شُوَاظٌ مِّن نَارٍ وَنُحَاسٍ فَلَا تَنْتَصِرَانِ. Flames of fire and molten copper will be sent against you. Or another translation is flames of fire and smoke, which is one of the possible meanings of nuhas, will be sent against you, and you will not be able to defend one another. And then Allah tells you more about this. He says, فَإِذَا انشَقَّتِ السَّمَاءُ فَكَانَتْ وَرْدَةً كَالدِّهَانِ. That when you see this horrible punishment that will befall over these people, it will make the sky like rosy red, like burnt oil. Okay? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ends this section of Surah Al-Rahman by talking about the sins of the ins and the jinn. Now, we have already firmly established, guys, who is the civilization that is contacting Dajjal? Primarily through contacting shayateen. It is what civilization? Modern Western civilization.
Western, yeah, yes.
I gave you two very important examples to look up. One of them was Jack Parsons. And what was Jack Parsons trying to do? Penetrate the heavens with his rockets. Just like Allah says in Surah Al-Rahman about these jinn and men who work together. They're going to try to penetrate the heavens. But let's not forget about Benjamin Franklin. Did any of you look him up for homework? He was involved with an organization called the Hellfire Club. And I believe when they excavated his house to repair it for a historical venture, they found a whole bunch of dead bodies under his home. Very interesting character, Benjamin Franklin. But Benjamin Franklin was also involved in contacting demons. He was also involved in the occult. He was also involved in Freemasonry. So this evil civilization, which is modern Western civilization, is going to become very technologically advanced because of its contact with shayateen and contact with Dajjal. But Allah has a plan for this civilization. Okay, now, are you following along so far? I'm about to get real deep. You got to put your thinking caps on tonight. What Allah is talking about here is the Melhama, and I'm going to try to explain. But first, we have to take a sidetrack. One of the greatest weapons Dajjal has ever used against our people and everyone in the world is the weapon of riba. The Prophet ﷺ said that, narrated from Abu Hurairah, there will come a time for mankind when everyone will take riba, and if he does not do so, verily the dust of it will reach him. Meaning that one of Dajjal's greatest weapons, because this is an end-time prophecy, is that the entire world will be involved in riba. Now, I'm sure I don't need to tell you all that a long time ago, before there was paper money, you guys know there was a time when there was no paper money, right?
Mm-hmm.
People used to use commodities in exchange for goods. Like, for example, salt, barley, dates, like things that had a long shelf life. I'll give you a bag of dates for a haircut, right? Or I'll give you a bag of salt for a pound of oranges, right? And then if you were particularly wealthy, you could amass something called gold or silver. And that could be used as a medium of exchange. And once again, gold, silver, dates, barley, all of it has intrinsic value. The value of the currency is in the currency itself. Okay. But something happened in the world, particularly in modern Western civilization. Shall I introduce to you the concept of fiat currency or paper money? So paper money became very famous, especially with Britain. Okay. Britain has the sterling pound. And who is that wonderful island that Dajjal started his mission from? We discovered was Britain. And of course, Britain was the #1 colonial power that went all over the world to convert mankind into a civilization just like itself. And one of the things they would do is they would conquer your area and they would introduce this concept of paper money to your civilization. Okay? And they would get you to start using paper money, but they would back the paper money with gold. And that's why we have something called the gold standard. Okay. When gold was found by 1848, it inspired the California gold rush, of course, and which helped the Western United States. And at the time, it resulted in inflation in the United States. So the de facto gold standard in 1834 was flooded with new gold and rising prices. In 1861, the Treasury Secretary, I'm reading this as Salmon Chase, printed the first U.S. paper-backed currency. So up until 1861, the United States was very similar to the rest of the world. Then in the Gold Standard Act of 1900, the United States established that gold is the only metal that can be redeemable for paper currency at a value of $20 an ounce. Okay. So basically what they decided is that we're going to create this new currency, and it had already happened before in Britain, but America started doing it also, which is basically a piece of paper, which is like a promissory note. Well, you can exchange your piece of paper for goods and services, but if you take that piece of paper to a bank, you can redeem it for gold. So the paper began to replace the gold. I don't want you to forget that point. It's a super duper, 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 duper important point. It's going to become so important very soon when I tell you about another prophecy. The paper began to function like the gold. Are you with me?
Yep.
Okay. Now, that remained the case, especially up until about 1913, when Congress created the Federal Reserve Act and stabilized gold and currency values in the United States. But then something called World War I broke out. Okay. World War I broke out, and this caused a lot of financial troubles for the United States and Europe because they began to print and print and print too many dollars. Okay. And then eventually you had the Great Depression of 1933, which created more economic instability. So then you had the gold standard and the Great Depression. Okay. The stock market crash of 1928. I'm not trying to get too deep into all these details, but I'm trying to help you understand how money progressively became what it is today. Okay. Then something very strange happened. Okay. Which is on April 20th, federal FDR, which is Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was a president during the time, ordered Americans to turn in all their gold in exchange for dollars, to prohibit the hoarding of gold and the redemption of gold by other countries. This created gold reserves in the place called Fort Knox, which I believe is in Tennessee. And the United States soon held the world's largest supply of gold. Now, take note of the last paragraph in this section. On January 30th, 1934. So basically FDR made having gold, not necessarily jewelry, but having gold in the form of currency illegal in the United States. Okay? And in 1934, the Gold Reserve Act prevented private ownership of gold except under license. And it allowed the government to pay its debts in dollars, not in gold. And this authorized FDR to increase the price of gold from $20 an ounce to $35 an ounce, which consequently devalued the dollar. Now, let me explain to you what that means. He made gold illegal. You had to turn in all your gold to the United States government, and in exchange, the government would give you dollars. And the rate they did it was $20 an ounce. So you give them an ounce of gold, they give you $20. And that dollar would function just like gold in the marketplace of the United States. However, later on, he said, okay, now gold is halal again. So you can come get it back from us, but now you have to pay us $35 an ounce. That's ripping off almost half of America's wealth, just like that. Because if it had been $40, that would literally be half. But he's 35, almost half of America's wealth was taken by the government just like that.
But at that point, wouldn't they? Aren't the values of the gold and the dollar equivalent? So there would be no point in trying to get that gold back.
No, because it was illegal.
Oh, okay.
It was illegal to have gold. Okay. And then he made it legal again. And people want gold because they understand gold has intrinsic value. It stores value. And we're going to get to that point in just a second. Mm-hmm. Whereas dollars suffer from something called inflation. Okay. They're constantly losing value. Okay. What do I mean by that? So if 100 years ago, my great-great-grandfather had $1,000 and he said, I'm going to put that $1,000 under my bed and I'm going to give it to my great-great-grandson, Isa. 100 years ago, $1,000 could buy you all kinds of things. For example, you could buy a house with it. Okay. Then around my grandfather's time, the value of the dollar had fallen so much that $1,000 could buy you a condo, not a house. Then by my dad's time, $1,000 could buy you an apartment for a year. Today, $1,000, you're lucky if it pays your rent for 1 month because the value of the currency is constantly falling. But the work that you put in is the same to earn the money. So this is called a ripoff. The central banks of all the countries that are printing dollars and whatever else they print are actually ripping their people off slowly but surely of wealth. Okay? So the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944 allowed for all the currencies of the world to be standardized into the dollar. The dollar. What does that mean? Well, because the United States basically won World War II, they decided after World War II was over that all of the currencies in the world had to be turned into dollars in order to be redeemable for gold. In other words, the French, for example, could not take their French currency and go redeem it in gold, which the United States now had most of the gold. They had to convert it into dollars first. So it made the dollar the strongest currency in the world. And then eventually, the United States disconnected their currency from gold. Okay, so that by the 1970s, gold was no longer redeemable, or dollars were no longer redeemable in gold. So how did they become redeemable? By the way, eventually inflation at that point had gone up to an ounce of gold at $124. Remember in FDR's time, it was $20 and then he raised it to 35 and now it's 124. Today, it's like an ounce of gold is what, like, it's really high. I don't remember the exact number. I think it's double this, more than double this. I mean, more than 10 times this. Okay, what eventually happened is we're going to watch a video. The petrodollar was born.
Such as the UK, the Cayman Islands. The simple definition of a petrodollar is the revenue from...
Hear that?
No.
No. Okay, let me go back to my screen sharing. Find out why you can't hear it. Let's stop share. Let's share again. Okay, share computer sound and audio. All right, let's try it again. Do you hear it now?
Oil in mainly Middle Eastern countries.
Okay, good. Let's start over.
The simple definition of a petrodollar is the revenue from oil in mainly Middle Eastern countries, a revenue that is denominated in US dollars, not the currency of the countries where the oil comes from. All those nations that export their oil must sell it in dollars, so if the dollar loses value, so does their oil. But countries also peg their real currency to the dollar. That means fixing their currency with the dollar. So if the dollar fluctuates, so does their currency. If the dollar value lowers, so do the goods and services of that country. This ensures those countries don't experience wild swings in inflation or deflation. So what exactly is the relation between petrodollars and real dollars? Welcome to this episode of the Infographic Show, how petrodollars affect the US dollar. We're told that the beginnings of this petrodollar system was in 1944 at the Bretton Woods Conference. This conference was one of the big events of the 20th century because it's when it was agreed that the new global currency would be the US dollar. America would be the only country that could print this currency. This is when we saw the
Did you hear that? America is the only currency allowed to print that.
formation of both the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund.
The World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. What do they do? You guys should read the book Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And they're going to explain to you what the World Bank and these International Monetary Fund do. They go into your country and they see that you're a struggling third world nation, but you have resources. And so what they say is, we're going to give you a loan and you can pay it back because you've got resources. Except that they give you a loan that's so high, you'll never be able to pay it back, and an interest rate that's so high, you'll never be able to pay it back. So that when you eventually can't pay it back because your country's leaders are corrupt and or there's some sort of catastrophe that takes place in your country, tsunami, earthquake, you name it, what they say is, okay, well, just let us send in these American companies to start extracting all the resources out of your country, and we'll forgive some of the debt for you. Okay?
As always, the website The Balance gives a very detailed account of what this would mean. The Balance explains if a country's currency value became too weak relative to the dollar, the bank would buy up its currency in foreign exchange markets. That would lower the currency's supply and raise its price. If the currency became too high, the bank would print more. That would increase the supply and lower its price. 43 countries signed up in an effort to rebuild the world after a devastating world war and to cooperate better with each other in terms of trade. The Bretton Woods website tells us it was felt by the leaders of the Allied countries, particularly the US and Britain, that a multilateral framework was needed to overcome the destabilizing effects of the previous global economic depression and trade battles. It ended anyway in 1971 when the US suffered what is called stagflation, and that means
Actually, what happened is that the United States disconnected its currency from gold in the 1970s, thanks to Richard Nixon. And the money was no longer tied to a valuable currency. It was just kind of floating in limbo. And then the United States did something very interesting. Now remember, up until this point, paper is functioning in the world economy like gold. Okay? And I wanted you to keep that point in your mind because something's about to happen.
a combination of inflation and recession. This had a negative effect on nations that belong to what is called the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries. Most of the member countries are in the Middle East, with others being in Central America and Africa. Then in 1979, we got something called the U.S.-Saudi Arabian Joint Commission on Economic Cooperation. In that agreement, Saudi Arabia agreed to use American dollars for their oil transactions.
Did you hear that? Saudi Arabia, by the end of the 70s, openly began to agree to only sell its oil in American dollars. And eventually, all of the other Arab nations that have oil would do the same. At that point, the petrodollar was born.
These dollars would get back into America through contractors, and so they were what are called recycled petrodollars. This deal with Saudi Arabia was the start of this petrodollar. Was this good for the US? Investopedia tells us the petrodollar system elevated the US dollar to the world's reserve currency, and through this status, the United States enjoys persistent trade deficits and is a global economic hedge money.
So what did America used to back its currency in? Gold. What is it now backing its currency in? Black gold. Oil. So oil became the foundation of America's currency, which was the world currency through which all other currencies have to transfer if they want to buy oil or if they want to redeem their currencies. America's currency is the number one, and everyone else has to transfer into America's currency. What is America's currency backed with? Oil, and the sale of oil in the United States, or in the Middle East primarily. Okay, now that I've shown you this, oil now becomes to function like gold used to function in the economy. Now that you understand this historical financial thing, let me show you an interesting hadith from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Soon, the river Euphrates, he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, will disclose a treasure, a mountain of gold. So whoever will be present at that time should not take any of it. Okay? Another hadith mentions, the hour will not be established until the river Euphrates uncovers a mountain of gold, and people will fight over it. Every 99 people out of 100 will be killed, and each one will say, perhaps I will be the one who is saved. In other words, a mountain of gold in the Euphrates River, which is in Iraq, modern-day Iraq, will be discovered. And people are going to fight in some sort of battle over that gold. And that battle is going to be of such a massive nature and casualties that 99 out of 100 people will die. Now, guys, I'll tell you something about conventional fighting. 99 out of 100 people don't die in conventional fighting. Swords and bows and arrows, even guns. On both sides, you may have high casualties, but not 99 out of 100. You have to be using some sort of weaponry in that fighting that just obliterates everything, so that literally maybe one person survives out of 100. Okay, now I'm going to show you something else. Look at the oil reserves around the river Euphrates. So this is Iraq today. And this border of Iraq here is basically the river Euphrates. It runs right into the Persian Gulf. And these are all the oil reserves in that area. Okay? Why am I showing you this? Because what did I tell you happened historically in the world in the 1970s? That the world currency, which is paper money, which had become, from the Bretton Woods Accord, the dollar, used to be redeemable in gold. And then it stopped being redeemable in gold. And then the oil-rich nations of the Middle East began to redeem oil for dollars, and only dollars. For example, Russia cannot go to Saudi Arabia and say, we want some of your oil, and give them the Russian, what is it, ruble or rupee? Ruble, I think. They have to turn their money into dollars first. Then they can buy the oil, because Saudi Arabia will not sell it to them in Russian currency. They have to use American currency, which always keeps the dollar strong. Guys, this is the mountain of gold. It's not meant to be understood literally, because now oil functions like gold. It is what backs the currency that the entire world is using. Now, let's start tying in some of our previous lessons here. What did I tell you the beast was? I told you the beast is the technological thing that we're building all over the earth, the grid of electrical wires and Wi-Fi signals and servers and cell phones and all this stuff that's connected together to build this creature on the earth that Dajjal is using to gather data and information and advance his technology so that he can come on the earth and appear to have godlike powers. Okay? But the primary thing allowing this beast to grow is oil, guys. It's oil. It is a resource that powers all of the automobiles, the trucks. It powers a lot of the generators all over the earth. I'm not saying that uranium doesn't create power. I'm not saying that wind energy and other things, they do, but not nearly to the extent that oil is. Okay? And that the largest reserves of this oil in the world are found in the Arabian Peninsula, and in particular here in the Euphrates River. Okay? So it is very important to Dajjal for him to have control of this area of the world, because he knows what fuels the beast. And he knows where does he get his power? From the beast. Okay? So the prophet is telling you that this area of the world is going to become very, very valuable, like gold. And that people are going to fight over this gold because they know how important it is. Every quote unquote first world country in the world needs to have access to lots of oil. China, the United States, Russia, all these quote unquote first world nations, they need oil. Okay, very, very important to them. And you can see from this graph that most of the oil in the world, at least over 50%, is coming from the Middle East. Okay. Now.
Sure.
Yes.
Just a quick question. In terms of the fighting over the gold and 99 out of 100 will die, do you think that if Middle Eastern nations such as Saudi Arabia, if they decided not to sell to first world countries, then fighting would ensue because they would need that oil, and if no one's going to sell it to them, then they would probably go to war for it, and so they're kind of forced to sell it.
Well, this is a whole nother subject altogether, but all of the Gulf nations, with the exception of like a few, they receive all of their protection from Western powers, Britain, the United States, so forth and so on, because they agreed a long time ago. I mean, Britain created Saudi Arabia. I don't know if you know that.
Mm-hmm.
The United States eventually took over that relationship when Britain lost its place in the world as a great power after World War II. And so the United States basically ensures all of Saudi Arabia's protection today. And by extension, you can add the UAE and some of these other oil countries, oil islands, as I call them. So they're more than happy to give the United States whatever they want in terms of oil, okay? In exchange for protection, that they are continuously allowed to be the king rulers of their land, that they get all their lollipops and everything that they want. And so they're the reason that the United States can do whatever it wants with the oil, right? These corrupt families that run these Middle Eastern countries. So they're not ever going to, rebel against that relationship. Why would they? You know what I mean? Like, they're the richest people in the world.
Right, yeah.
And why would they want to stop being the richest people in the world? And that's why the prophet, and we'll talk about this maybe in a future lesson, he called the east of Medina Qarnu Shaitan, the age of Satan. Directly east of Medina is Riyadh. And then if you go a little further east, it's the UAE. These particular places on earth are totally in alignment with the Dajjal. And that's why you saw just recently the UAE came out and just normalized relationships with Israel openly now. Saudi Arabia can't do it just yet. They've already done it behind the scenes. But we're getting into a whole nother subject here. Okay. Back to our hadith. So whenever you see Beit al-Maqdis being built up, guys. That's Jerusalem. You're going to see Medina in a state of ruins. Go to Medina today, guys. You're going to see them demolishing all of the historical sites of the Prophet ﷺ and his companions, all under the guise of we need to expand the masjid. The Muslim ummah is so big now. We need more people to come to Medina. We need the masjid to hold 1 million, 2 million, 5 million. So we have to keep demolishing this place and that place. We have to demolish the house of Khadija. We have to demolish this. We have to demolish that. And then we're going to build hotels. And then when we want it to be bigger, we're going to demolish those hotels and build bigger hotels. And so if you go to Medina today, you're going to see a whole lot of destruction everywhere so that they can expand this masjid. Same thing happening in Mecca. Like they're literally removing whole mountains in Mecca. So what's happening in Jerusalem? Well, now that it's the capital of Israel, it's being built up and getting bigger and bigger and bigger and more important in the world. Their goal is to eventually become the second Silicon Valley of the world, or actually to overtake Silicon Valley. It's another reason why you see so much trouble happening in California now and all these businesses leaving. It's all intentional. They're trying to devalue Silicon Valley in California so that Jerusalem can rise up as the new Silicon Valley. There's like over 300 tech startups in Israel today. But the next thing that's going to happen is the Melhama. Okay? The Melhama is the very next step. Okay? What kind of Melhama is this? Guys, it's such a bad war that according to the Prophet ﷺ, the destruction of this war, let me highlight this section so you understand. Two groups of people will fight each other, and like a fight in which has never been seen before, so much so that even if a bird were to fly past their flanks, it would fall down dead before reaching the end of them. Large scale massacre is what it's called. It's the Melhama. 99 out of 100 people are going to die. Now I'm going to try and tie all this information that I gave you guys tonight together so that you understand what's going on. Let me get back to my 10 signs. So Dajjal began his mission from Britain to conquer the world, to enslave the world in a system of riba, paper currency. And he used Gog and Magog to do it. We already talked about who they are. Eventually, he would build the beast, Dabbatul Ard, for several reasons, and it would happen primarily in the Western civilization, modern Western civilization. Okay? And the beast is primarily fueled by petroleum, so that's very important. But that petroleum, which would begin to function like gold in the economy of the world, people want it. All the nations of Gog and Magog want it. Okay? So they're eventually going to get into a very, very awful fight over it, because every nation wants to be the one who has access to that gold in the Euphrates River. And it's going to be such an awful war that Dukhan is going to cover the earth. Okay? And at this point, we have to introduce the concept of nuclear weapons. So nuclear weapons, by the way, there is some evidence that nuclear weapons are not real, that they were basically created to keep all the nations of the world from fighting each other. But that's a whole nother subject. We can talk about that some other time. But let's just assume for tonight's lesson that they are real. The nations that primarily have nuclear weapons are the first world nations who primarily want oil. Russia, China, Israel, the United States, Britain, France, India, Pakistan. Okay. Used to be South Africa had nuclear weapons, but they got rid of them. But it's these primarily Northern European nations that have nuclear weapons. And of course, they have an enemy, which is they have declared Russia to be their enemy and China to be their enemy. So you have being set up on the earth today, these two groups of people that have all been infiltrated by Ya'juj and Ma'juj. And they are all about to engage in a very, very, very terrible war over getting access to this oil so that they can keep this beast moving, okay, which is their first world technology. In the meantime, they're sucking tons and tons of natural gas, tons and tons of oil, tons and tons of resources from under the ground. Now, let me ask you guys something. If there is a massive ocean of oil under Greensboro, and over the course of 100 years, you suck every last drop of that oil out, what have you left in its place?
Nothing.
Nothing, except a giant empty cavity under your feet. If I frack, you guys know what fracking is? If I frack all of the ground underneath Greensboro to extract all of the natural gas out of underneath, there's a large amount of natural gas under Greensboro, for example, and I frack it, that gas was creating pressure under the earth, okay? If I get rid of all of that pressure, what have I left? Like what happens when you remove pressure? You create you science guys that are here tonight.
If you say, can you say that again?
If I remove pressure, I'm creating a what? It's a V word.
Pressure. A D word?
V word.
Oh, volume.
Vacuum. If I remove pressure, I'm creating a vacuum. Okay? So all over the world today, but in specific places like the United States, Russia, and the Arabian Peninsula, we are sucking massive amounts of resources under the ground and leaving giant cavities. Shall I introduce you to the three sinkings of the earth? One in the east, one in the west, and one where, guys? In the Arabian Peninsula. What is happening, I believe, and Allah knows best, is that the great sinkings of the earth that are going to take place are going to take place because we have drained the resources out of the earth and left these massive cavities underneath our feet. And that stuff is eventually going to collapse. And if you think over the past 150 years how much oil and natural gas we have extracted out from under the earth, you can really start to understand how massive these cavities under the earth are right now. And what a humongous sinking of the earth will take place when these things finally collapse. So in essence, these signs of the Dukhan and the sinkings of the earth have not happened yet, but we can already start to see how they're going to happen. Gog and Magog have to get into a nasty battle with each other, okay? They're trying to get access to the river of gold, or the mountain of gold under the Euphrates River. And they're also loaded down with nuclear weapons. And let's just say they don't have nuclear weapons, but they have lots of other kinds of weapons. It really fits the description of the Melhama when you start to understand that when nuclear weapons go off, they send huge plumes of smoke and fire up into the air, and that would cause birds to lose flight and fall down to the earth dead. But it gets back to the beginning of our lesson, which is when we were talking about Surah Ar-Rahman. So in Surah Ar-Rahman, we find out that Allah is going to deal with one group of Gog and Magog, particularly the especially evil ones who are involved in space travel and the exploration of the earth. So let's go back and read that section one more time so you understand what Allah says he's going to do. And then we're going to read one last ayah of the Quran and we'll call it a night. Okay? Allah says, سَنَفْرُغُ لَكُمْ أَيُّهَا الثَّقَلَيْنِ. Allah is going to deal with these two groups of evil jinn and human beings. He says, يَا مَعْشَرَ الْجِنِّ وَالْإِنسِ إِنِ اسْتَطَعْتُمْ أَن تَنْفُذُوا مِنْ أَقْطَارِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ فَانْفُذُوا. So, O assembly of evil jinn and men, if you are able to penetrate the heavens and the earth, go ahead and do it. لا تنفذون إلا بسلطان. But you will not be able to do it without Allah's permission. And then Allah tells you, يرسل عليكما شواظ من نار ونحاس فلا تنتصران. He's going to cause them to be punished with a terrible fire followed by smoke, and they will not be able to defend themselves from it. And then Allah tells us that smoke will appear like dark red burnt oil in the sky. This is the Dukhan that will appear on the earth after the battle. And then Allah tells us that it's on that day, the jinn and the men are not going to be asked about their sins because they're going to be wiped out. And right after that, that's when Israel will take over and the Dajjal will appear on the earth because they are going to remain neutral during this war. They're not going to be on the side of the United States or Europe, and they're not going to be on the side of Russia and China, who are being pitted against each other for this gold. They want them to destroy each other. Gog and Magog are only being used by the Jews. I want you to understand that very importantly. When they went to the Khazar Empire to get them to convert to Judaism, they did so because they heard the prophet say, and the Quran say, that they will not be allowed to return back to their town until Gog and Magog are released. Okay, Jews don't convert people to their religion. They believe you have to be born into it. So it didn't make any sense for them to go to the Khazar Empire and ask them to become Jews, except that they wanted to use them. So they used them to infiltrate Europe, to change the civilization. And then eventually, this evil alignment of shayateen and human beings took place. And so Dajjal was able to use all of it. Now, we'll end tonight on an ayah of the Quran that's so very interesting that talks about all this. So Allah says, إنما مثل الحياة الدنيا كماء أنزلناه من السماء فاختلط به نبات الأرض مما يأكل الناس والأنعام. So the example of the life of this world is like the rain we send down from the sky to produce the mixture of plants in which humans and animals consume. So this is the natural world the way it was for such a long time. But then a new period of time is going to come. حتى إذا أخذت الأرض زخرفها. A time is going to come when Allah is going to bring out all of the beautiful things in the earth. وزينت. And then it's going to become very beautiful with something of the beauty of the things that are in the earth. وظن أهلها أنهم قادرون عليها. Until the people think they have absolute control over the natural world. أتاها أمرنا. And then Allah's command is going to come. ليلا أو نهارا. It's going to happen at day or night, because on some parts of the earth it's daytime, while on other parts of the earth it's nighttime. Like here in Egypt it's night right now, but for you guys it's daytime. فَجَعَلَهَا حَصِيدًا. Allah is going to cause it all to be destroyed. كَأَن لَّمْ تَغْنَ بِالْأَمْسِ. As if none of that beauty that was brought out from the earth was ever there before. كَذَلِكَ نُفَصِّلُ الْآيَاتِ لِقَوْمٍ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. And this is a very important lesson for people who think and ponder and reflect. This is the ayah that talks about how eventually human beings are going to get to a point where they can bring out from the earth all of the beautiful treasures that are inside of it. The petroleum, the gold, the oil, the diamonds, everything. And then they're going to eventually think that they've gotten to a point where they've mastered all of nature. But then Allah's command is going to come. They're going to become so greedy because they know that that oil is all they can use to keep that technological civilization going. And then Allah's command is going to come, which is that they're going to get so greedy that they're going to fight each other for it. And that fight is going to be so terrible that it literally destroys all of that stuff. And there'll be a small section of it left in the Middle East, which Israel will use. And that's when Dajjal will come out. But eventually, as we said in the last lesson, the beast will run out of energy. And that's where we get the lesson in the Quran of Suleiman and his staff, and the beast eating at the power of his staff that allows him to control the jinn and allows him to have powers to control the nations. The mansa'a of the staff. Because remember, he doesn't call it asa. So at this point, Dajjal and all of his powers will fall apart whenever the mountain of gold runs out. Now, there is evidence, I'll say, that oil resources are actually renewable, but we're not going to get into that tonight. We're just going to assume tonight that everything we're being told about oil and natural gas is that it's a non-renewable resource. Or at the very least, we're using so much of it at this point that even if it is renewable, it takes some time to renew, and we're using it too fast for it to renew. So tonight, I've tried to take a section of the major signs, show you some other predictions about the future from the prophet, show you how they came about by analyzing history, and particularly the history of the fiat currency system that came out of where? First, Britain, and then eventually the United States. Remember, Dajjal's mission, his first day is like a month, his second day is like a week. His first day is like a year, his second day is like a month, and his third day is like a week, until finally he appears in human form in the days that are like our days. And I tried to show you how this will eventually culminate in a war. Now, I want to tell you something very interesting. In a book I'm reading now called Dajjal and Awwal al-Zaman, the First Age, there is a chapter quoted where a rabbi is having a meeting in Eastern Europe with other rabbis. And he says that his big hope is that the European world destroys itself so that Israel can finally emerge as the world power. And if you read this interesting book called The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, you find the same concept, which is that the Jewish world will continue to manipulate and use Europe, and then eventually get Europe to destroy itself. And that was the point behind the First World War, the Second World War, and then finally the third and final World War, the Melhama, or as the Prophet called it, the Al-Melhama, which in Hebrew is Melchamis, which I've actually heard current Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu use that term, Melchamis in Hebrew, which is a direct cognate of Melhama. But we can already predict how all this is going to end up. All of the power that Dajjal has and will have comes from the beast, which the beast relies on the mountain of gold. He needs the petrodollar to have access to this technology that will give him godlike powers. So when that runs out, he will actually have no powers, because remember, he's not God. He doesn't actually have God's powers. He can't literally make it rain. He has to fly his planes up into the sky and spray the atmosphere with all the junk in order to create the rainstorms. He can't actually bring anyone back to life. He has to use the technology in the medical field in order to bring people back to life. He can't know everything about you without the cell phones and the servers and everything that's been with you your whole life collecting data about you. He needs the technology. In other words, the real power that Suleiman had in his staff was the power that Allah gave him. It's not technology. So when Dajjal tries to impersonate Suleiman, he has to use something else. Okay? He impersonates Suleiman by using technology to appear as if he has the powers that Suleiman had, when he really doesn't. So, in conclusion, we have gone through tonight at least two of the major signs, Dukhan, which will result from the Melhama, and the sinkings of the earth, which will be from all of the depleted resources we're taking out of the ground that will eventually cause the ground to collapse in at least 3 places on the earth in a very huge way. We've gone for about an hour now. So do you guys have any questions?
Yes,
I
I
do
have a
have one
question.
question, Sheikh. Oh, sorry, go
Okay,
ahead.
okay. Yeah, my question was about Malhama. So is that like literally a world war, like where all the countries use nuclear weapons like that they have?
Yes, if you
I'm
look at
confused
the
about
world
that.
today, yeah, if you look at the world today, the Western world, meaning like Western Europe and the United States, which have nuclear weapons, and you could include Israel in this, are being pitted against Russia. And Russia is allied with China, and they both have nuclear weapons. And then to some smaller extent, uh, India and Pakistan is kind of like its own thing. Okay. But let's just deal with Russia, China versus United States, Western Europe. Okay. That's why you constantly see all this anti-Russia stuff in American media. Like Russia's fiddling in our elections. Russia's this, Russia's that. America spent decades in a Cold War with Russia. Like there's so much sentiment in American ethos about hatred towards Russia. Okay. And in reality, the Prophet ﷺ said, and I'll just show you this hadith so you can see it as well, that the hour will not be established until there's a war between two groups of people. Among there will be a great number of casualties. Through the claims, though their claims of both of them will be one and the same. And what he's talking about here is that their da'wah will be the same. That's what the hadith says. Da'wahuma wahida. They follow the same da'wah. Now, if you look at modern Western Europe and the America, the primary religious civilization was Christian. And if you look at Russia, it's the same thing. Their primarily civilization was founded upon Christianity. They follow the same da'wah, the same call. Okay. Though there is differences between the type of Christianity they follow. You can't sit here in my class. Okay? You can sit over here, but you can't come over here.
Can I hear you?
No. So this great war is going to be between two groups primarily who follow the same religion. Okay. And these nations have to have great weaponry for the Melhama to be like the prophet prophesied it. So awful that 99 out of 100 people die. And what is it primarily over? Access to the mountain of gold, which we said we're interpreting as oil, because oil functions as gold in the world economy today, as a backing for the world currencies. So you already see that happening in the Middle East today in Syria. The United States and Israel and Britain and France tried really hard to topple Assad in Syria, because that would have been very good for Israel. But Russia intervened, and they came and helped out Assad to get rid of all of the terrorist organizations that were in his country and to fight back. And that created a huge problem for the United States and Israel, because they really wanted Syria to fall. They really wanted to get rid of Assad. And I'm not here defending Assad and saying he's some great guy or something. I'm just trying to explain to you the political situation. Also, you had Trump recently, who appeared to be kind of friendly with Russia, but in reality, the whole time he was dismantling all of the nuclear regulations that the United States used to have with Russia. Go look up all of the agreements that Trump dismantled during his presidency, which were agreements on like non-proliferation of nuclear weapons, like not building new nuclear weapons, agreements about not using nuclear weapons. And since Trump came in, he seemed to be like a friend of Russia, but in reality, he wasn't. He was creating a situation where a war between the United States and Russia using nuclear weapons can finally take place. And there's no treaties or anything to govern it. And the Democrats are the worst, because what did they do for the entirety of Trump's presidency? They tried to blame Russia for the fact that he got elected. In other words, they wanted their entire electoral base to hate Russia and blame Russia for the fact that Trump was there. So that's why I tell you, Gog and Magog work together. Republican, Democrat, same bird, okay? They're all working for the same goal, but they appear to be opposites. But when you look at their policies, you start to understand how they're working towards the same goals. So in a nutshell, yes, the Melhama will most likely be some sort of nuclear war or some sort of war in which weapons are used that are so awful that they send up smoke into the sky and not a single place on earth will it not be visible. And that it'll be weapons that kill 99 out of 100 people involved in the war, and that it'll be primarily between two nations that follow the same dawah, and they will be fighting over the mountain of gold, which is the oil. And Syria, just like Iraq and just like Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and all those countries, they're all full of the oil. It's all right around the Euphrates River.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Sheikh, in regards to the three sinkholes, one in the Arabian Peninsula in the east and the west. So I was just doing a little bit of looking around and saw that the majority of countries that are producing most oil, most lists show that United States is number one. So
Right.
if we were to use the Arabian Peninsula as kind of like the center point of the world, so that kind of accounts for the western part. But and then of course the Arabian Peninsula itself already has everyone knows that. But what about the east? As far as I can tell, relative to Saudi Arabia, Russia would be the only eastward nation that sort of accounts for that. Would that be accurate, or would it have to be another nation?
Yeah, you're actually, I had that question today because I knew that one of y'all was probably going to ask that. And I agree with you. I mean, as far as I can tell right now, I think it'll probably, because who's the Melhama between? Russia, Western Europe, and the United States, and then we can include China in there because it's allied with Russia. And where is all this oil extraction taking place? Primarily in Russia and the United States. They're the two leading producers in the world after the Middle East. So they have these huge empty cavities under their countries. So when they start launching nuclear weapons at each other, they're going to hit the surface of those countries and they're going to cause the giant cavities under them to collapse. So it makes sense to me exactly what you're saying, that the sinking in the West is going to be United States.
Mm-hmm.
The sinking in Arabia, we already know what that's going to be caused by. But that the sinking in the East could most likely be Russia. Because I couldn't think of a far Eastern nation who's pulling a lot of resources out of the ground. But remember, all this stems on my hypothesis, which is that the sinking of the earth happens because of us extracting materials out of the ground. That doesn't mean that Allah couldn't have already put a giant empty cavity under the ground under some Eastern nation. Allahu alam, I don't know. I'm just telling you guys what I think about all this. If it makes sense to you, accept it. If it doesn't make sense, then you don't have to accept it. But I'm trying to explain to you how you can anticipate how these signs are going to play themselves out. All you have to do is look at history, look at economics, look at current world affairs, and you can kind of start looking at these hadith and using them as goggles for how you see the world. And a lot of things will start making sense to you. But at the end of the day, we're just like the companions. We're just sitting around talking about this, trying to figure it out. We're not prophets. I can't say for 100% certainty this is how the future is going to play itself out. But if anything we learned from tonight, there are certain places on earth that are not the best places to be right now. I would recommend any place on earth that is currently involved in activities that Allah said in the Quran He destroyed people for. For example, 10 times in the Quran, Allah mentions the people of Lut and how they engaged in homosexual acts, and Allah destroyed them. Might that be a lesson for Muslims that maybe they shouldn't be living in places where people are committing homosexual acts, like places that legalize gay marriage, which means two men can engage in homosexual acts and the state condones it and it's okay. Just something to think about. Might those be the places that Allah mentions that jinn and men are loaded down with sins, and that he's going to deal with them by sending against them fire followed by smoke. It's going to make the sky like dark, rosy oil, burnt oil. It's something to
Oh,
think about.
I I think I misheard that. So, and I'm a little bit ignorant, so forgive me if it comes off this question. So, when when Allah was talking about the punishments about homosexuality, that wasn't just in regards to the story of Lut, but in all future people. Like that's what that punishment would apply to as well. Like the punishment is ongoing. Is that what it is?
Yeah, anytime you engage in certain types of sins that Allah mentions in the Quran that he destroyed previous peoples for, then that same way Allah dealt with them, he will deal with any nation who engages in acts like that.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, it's a lesson for people. That's why Allah keeps repeating it. Why does he tell us this story 10 times in the Quran? Because he's beating you over the head to think. If I do this, or if I live in a place like this, then this is the inevitable destination it's headed towards. I have a theory for why a lot of Jewish money is behind the pornography industry, and specifically why a lot of Jewish money is behind promoting homosexuality, is because the Jews know that. Because in their Torah, it says the same story. And the reason that they're trying to get sexual corruption to be so high in these Western nations is because they know that Allah will destroy them for doing it. And that's why they promote it. They're trying to get the Creator to destroy these places.
Interesting.
That's my theory anyway. All right, gentlemen or ladies, do you have any other questions for tonight's lesson? Because I need to get up off here.
Alhamdulillah, that's it for me.
Tonight's lesson was a lot of stuff. If it didn't all sink in, guys, trust me, it might take years before all this makes sense to you. Okay, I'm just putting a lot of ideas together to try to explain something to you. Go do some research, and I'll post in the WhatsApp group a lot of this stuff, like the history of money, the riba system, the petrodollar. If you don't have a good, firm grasp of all these different concepts, then a lot of this stuff is just not going to make sense to you. Because once again, from our very, 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 very first class, what appears to us in the text of Hadith is very different than the way we're explaining it tonight. Because appearances and reality in the last age are different. And we need to be people who look at the world around us and look at history and look at the flow of information to see if what the prophet was actually trying to explain to us is what's currently happening in the world around us. So if tonight's class was a little bit heavy or foggy or smoky, don't worry about it, because you have a lot of homework to do. But at the very least, go and read Surah Al-Rahman, because we've already firmly established this link between the shayateen and the human beings in Western civilization. That should be crystal clear to you guys by now, that they work together to create the technology. And they're linked between Dajjal. And Jack Parsons is like he's like the smoking gun. You know what I mean? Like once you learn about Jack Parsons, a lot of this stuff starts to make sense. Hopefully some of you guys looked up NASA over the past week to find out about this evil, lying organization. But that's for another day, inshallah. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك ونشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت ونستغفرك ونتوب إليك اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه اللهم أرنا أشياءك اللهم يا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على دينك اللهم ربنا زدنا علما اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام.
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Zargam?
Yeah.
So by any chance, is there any way to convert these uh recordings into? I was trying to figure it out